So the main focus right now is to always keep everything simple. Hi, my name is Omar. I'm a concept artist, and today I'm going to show you guys how I make 3D thumbnails or 3D blockouts for environment scenes. And a lot of it is just doing simple poly modeling and just creating a scene, focusing on composition, a little bit of lighting here and there. And once you get all that figured out, then you can move on to your final scene. But before we get started, I just want to mention that 87.6% of you are not subscribed to this channel, so hit the subscribe button, like it, share it. It means a lot to me. Help me grow this channel. The first thing you want to do is have some sort of reference for the piece you're making. Have an idea as to what kind of space you're creating. You don't have to have all the answers before your block out, but just some basic information so that you stay on track with everything. And the reason you want to do that is because many times when you start building in 3D, it's very easy to get lost. It's very easy to add a lot of detail, and then the next thing you know is that you have this scene that just doesn't make any sense. So definitely do some research, have some good references, and then move with 3D. And like in my case, what I was doing right now is that I wanted to make some sort of like a sci-fi airport terminal. And so I was looking at a lot of like airport terminals, and I was looking at all the machines they use and the crowd and the security and just like the overall structure and the set dressing of an environment like that. An environment that's like very well organized when it comes to their machines and their layout. The people traveling are probably not gonna be like, you know, in like walking in one line. It's probably just gonna be like them all over the place. Maybe they'll be in a line when they're, you know, scanning their stuff through that little scanner thingy. But other than that, just, you know, just noticing these little things here and there is because when you get references like that, it adds a personality to your piece, and it also plays a big part in the storytelling aspect of everything. So once you get your references figured out, it's time to build everything in 3D. Now, some people like to do some sketches in Photoshop or whatever your program of choice is, and some people just like to do everything in 3D. In my case, when I'm working on an exterior shot, I find it a little bit easier to sketch it out. So when you're doing an interior shot, it's a little bit difficult because you want to make sure your perspective is right. And so generally I try to just start blocking out everything in 3D. And at this stage, it's very important to keep everything simple. Think about it this way. When you sketch thumbnails for environments, use big chunky blocky shapes, either a 2-value drawing or either a 3-value drawing, but you don't really go ahead and start detailing everything from the get-go. So you want to use that same mindset when it comes to building your blockout, your simple 3D structures, is because right now we're not really worried too much about how cool this piece looks. We're more worried about our composition. And so we want to keep everything real simple. And so you guys will see me that I'm going to be using like simple primitive shapes, and I'll obviously edit them to some extent, because I just don't want to use like simple cubes all over the place, but I'm not going to spend too much time modeling out every single thing. And at this stage, you can also think about lighting. You can definitely play around with lighting a little bit more when you start texturing and building your entire set, but this could also be a good opportunity to just try to throw in some lights in there, see what direction works, what light direction gives you the best result, and just play around with that kind of thing. And a lot of it is just experimentation, because because this is the experimentation phase right now. You're not like getting married to one idea. It's just seeing what's working and what's not. One thing that I also like doing during this phase is that I'll like constantly like duplicate a lot. Like I'll make one model and then I'll just like duplicate it. I don't have to like constantly just make a new cube every single time. I'm just gonna use my existing models and see if I can just like squash them, stretch them, and see if I can get some good variation. And there's also this one misconception online where people call this process 3D sketching, but whenever I hear the word sketching, I'm just visualizing drawing in 3D, which is not the case here. We're not drawing anything in 3D right now. We're just like modeling everything in 3D. There is a technique that I like to use where I can get some organic looking shapes, which I will go over in this video as well. But other than that, it's just many times whenever people are referring to 3D sketches, they're just talking about 3D blockouts, which means yes, you have to model everything out in 3D. Unless you're using a program like 3D Code or Gravity Sketch or Adobe Medium, where you're literally sculpting in VR and you're drawing from nothing. A lot of these 3D packages, people are just using simple 3D blockouts, and they're referring that to as 3D sketching. So whenever you see people talk about it, don't ever get confused and think that, oh, they're going to show you how to sketch in Blender, because many times they're not going to show you how to sketch in Blender. It's just going to be how to model basic forms in Blender. So once I had like a single terminal, like a single track modeled out, I thought it'd be cool to just like duplicate it, and I threw in some lights as well, and it looked pretty cool. And then the next part that I wanted to do was just do like the walls, the floors, and things like that. But yeah, like I said earlier, this is the phase where I'm still experimenting and I'm just seeing, you know, if it's working good or not. I wanted to do like 2 to 3 different shots, like one aerial shot and the one just like, you know, like a regular POV shot. At this stage, it can also be helpful to use booleans that you can cut in through your models. Sometimes it can be very time consuming when it comes to just like cutting through your shapes, you know, extruding inwards, outwards, deleting faces and whatnot. But with booleans, it's just very instant, and Blender has this really cool boolean option as well. I think if you have that boolean add-on enabled, you should be able to like do a real-time boolean. And then once you're done with it, you can always just like apply all the modifiers, and the mesh is just there. So at this stage, I'm still not exactly sure what exactly my main focus is in this environment, but I'm still gonna continue building it because 70% of it is based on reality. And so I'm hopeful that as I progress through this, I will eventually figure out a cool concept that'll make this piece unique and stand on its own. And that's the one thing that I really hate about personal projects, is because when you're working on personal projects, it can be anything, right? You have to give yourself limitations. But if you fail to give yourself those limitations, it can be really hard to find like a goal, and it can be very easy to steer away from that, you know, one main goal. So sometimes it's like helpful to just like be loose with it. Just go with the flow, see what feels right and what doesn't feel right, and just follow your gut and your instincts. This is the part where I thought would be a good time to use a Bezier curve and add a screw modifier on it. So when you do that, you go to edit mode and then use this pen thingy and delete everything. And here's where you can like kind of draw stuff in 3D in a way. I'm not exactly sure the mechanics of how this modifier works, but it's all about happy accidents at this point. But with this, you can like play around with your angle, you know, your screw and iteration sliders on the right side. You can also mess around with your axis, and sometimes you can get some really cool results. And so I thought this would be a good time to just mess around with those, because I wanted to add some organic looking shapes. In 3D Code, when I'm using 3D Code, it's a lot easier. I can just like I mentioned earlier, 3D Code is one of those programs where you can literally sketch in 3D, as opposed to Blender where you're like kind of blocking out stuff in 3D. And so this technique, this tool appears somewhat a little bit similar to that. And so I made that, and if you notice, I've also made a copy of like my whole set, and that's what I usually do. For each thumbnail shot, I'll just make a duplicate of my whole set and then make a whole new camera and everything. And this is why I feel like it's very important to keep your blockouts low polys, because that way you don't have any hardware or software problems, because everything is low resolution. But after using this this curve, I just made a bunch of random curves, and then I selected parts of it and separated out, because once you make them, it's all part of one big mesh. And so you have to right click on it and convert it into a mesh first, because at first it's just a curve, which is different from a mesh, and I'm not gonna get into all the details, but yeah. And from there, it's all about placing it again and just experimenting all over again. And the one thing that I was trying to go for is kind of like, I was trying to create those overlaps. And, you know, and this is the part where I'm just like playing around with it, and I'll probably not even end up using this, but just to see how far I can push this, it's really good. And sometimes it's just good to show like ideation in thumbnails, right? And so right now I'm also rendering using Eevee. Like I don't have to use cycles for this process. It's because everything is in grayscale, it's in black and white, so you don't really need any, you know, super crazy looking renders at this stage. At this point, you just need screenshots, not gonna lie, because it's gonna be like this tiny on your actual paper if you have like 6 thumbnails. As long as you're using Eevee and you have the screen space reflections, bloom, and ambient occlusion turned on, you should get some pretty decent looking results. And so I did the same thing again, where I made another duplicate of my set, and then I moved around pieces here and there as well, deleted some pieces, and added some lights as well. And at this stage, I'm just using point lights. I feel like point lights work really nicely with interiors. And one thing that I also learned in the past, if you've watched my previous videos, I've also used a lot of emission lights. When I say emission lights, I mean like I make a 3D object, and then I put an emission node on it, so then that 3D object becomes a light source and radiates light, and that usually slows down your render time, which I learned recently. So it's very helpful to use area lights and point lights whenever you can, because it'll speed up your process a lot. The other thing that I also learned is that if you use the volume, the fog, that takes a lot of render time as well. So what I would do is, sometimes what I like to do is I'll render without the fog, and then I'll just take a screenshot with the fog and kind of use that as a reference point, and then add fog manually in Photoshop using photos or whatnot. That's just a technique you can use to save some time. But if you have good hardware specs, you can definitely, just render everything with the fog. The other thing that I also see a lot of artists do is that instead of blocking out simple models in 3D, they'll just straight up download models from Sketchfab. Now, the models that they might download might not be the perfect model, right? But sometimes you get lucky with that kind of thing, and sometimes you get some, simple free detail as well. So that's definitely a route you can take also. And like I said, there's no right way or wrong way to do this kind of thing. I personally like this method a lot more, is because I feel like I have more control over a lot of the things. And since I'm modeling out everything by myself, I know exactly what I need and what I don't need. Because sometimes what happens when you start looking for those models online, you become a slave to those models and you start designing around those models, and you don't really get a chance to experiment what you can make. You don't get a chance to practice modeling. And I feel like it's also a good way where you can just practice simple 3D poly modeling as well. And so I really like this technique. But then again, there isn't really a right way or wrong way. Sometimes what people do is that before making a composition like that, they'll just straight up work on making assets first. They'll probably make their high poly assets, and then once they made all their assets, then they'll go back to a new Blender scene. They'll just start placing them around and just do their thumbnails that way. So the different approaches you can take with this, there isn't really a right or a wrong way to do things. But for my project, I didn't really have any assets planned out yet. So I thought it'd be cool if I just focused on my composition first, and then once I have something that I like, then I can dive deeper down and just make stuff that I want to just fill my environment with. And then here I thought it'd be cool to have the idea that I ended up settling for is that I would have these cool looking elevators that just take you up. And so I thought it'd be cool to have my elevators be the main focal point. And since it's going to be a three shot project that I'm thinking of doing, I thought I could just do an aerial shot of showing the entire scene, and then maybe a close-up of the scanners at the bottom on the floor, and then maybe another close-up, and then a shot of the elevator going up. So yeah, so right now I've got 6 different sets up here, and they all have different cameras also. And so I can toggle between the cameras and just view all my shots. And the last one came out real nice. Actually, the last 2 ones, I really like those 2. And then what you can do next, you can either just take a screenshot or just do a viewport render image and just put it all in Photoshop and call it a day, honestly. Either that, or you can draw on top of it if you want to add more things, photo bash a little bit more on it. It just depends on how far you want to push this. If you're doing for animation, then I feel like people like to do a lot of line drawings for that kind of stuff. But if you're doing more photorealism, I feel like this could be a good stopping point, because then you're just gonna be wasting time at that point if you're doing a line drawing, because all of that is gonna disappear in your final image. So, but yeah, you can just place them on a new document, just look at them, see what you like, what you don't like. I personally really like number 6, 5, and 4. 6 was just another variation of number 1. But yeah, these were the 6 thumbnails that I made, and yeah. Alright guys, that should be all for today. Thank you so much for coming by and watching this video. And in the next one, here's a little sneak peek. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna build my whole scene in the next video, where I'll start building all my assets first, and then I'm gonna start dropping them in my scene wherever I had all my little placeholders. Some of them I made them in Blender, and I think I made 1 or 2 of them in 3D Code, and then I just copy pasted them in Blender and just made different variations. So yeah, we're gonna go over that entire process in the next one, and I'm super excited for that one because this piece is turning out so good. At first I was like, I don't know what I'm making, but you know what? As you progress through it, it just all works out, I guess. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for coming by. I appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.